The summer of 55 BC. The air thrummed with the guttural cries of battle, the clash of bronze on shield, and the screams of men consumed by the grim harvest of war. Along the eastern bank of the mighty Rhine, where the current churned with unforgiving power, a scene of unmitigated disaster unfolded for the legions of Rome. It was not a grand pitched battle that brought this horror, but a relentless, insidious guerrilla campaign. A brutal war of attrition waged by the Germanic Usipetes and Tencteri tribes. They had brazenly crossed the Rhine, pouring into Gaul, violating Roman-protected lands, and slaughtering the local Eburones and Menapii with a chilling efficiency. The Legio ex Equestris, famed for its loyalty and ferocity under Caesar, found itself stretched thin, its discipline eroding under the constant harassment. Small skirmishes turned into ambushes, foraging parties vanished without a trace, and the Germanic warriors, masters of the dense forests and treacherous riverbanks, struck with impunity before melting back into the shadows. General Quintus Atrius, a seasoned tribune, watched in grim despair as his cohorts, once a symbol of Roman might, were reduced to desperate patrols, their morale plummeting with each fallen comrade. One particularly catastrophic incident stands etched in the annals of this ignominious campaign. A cohort of nearly 600 men, detached to scout a ford near what is now modern-day Andernach, was utterly annihilated. They were caught in a narrow defile, flanked by unseen foes, their meticulously trained formations broken by a relentless torrent of javelins and axes. Not a single Roman soldier returned. The Rhine, normally a bulwark against invasion, had become a conduit for death. The reports filtering back to Caesar were stark, brutally honest. The enemy numbers are unknown, their movements swift, their retreat across the river impossible to intercept, read one dispatch from Publius Crassus, a young legate. Another, from the venerable Marcus Licinius, spoke of dwindling supplies and the growing desperation among the auxilia. The raw statistics were damning. Over the preceding 6 months, an estimated 3,000 Roman legionaries and auxiliary troops had been lost in these skirmishes, a slow, agonizing bleed that threatened to cripple Caesar's entire Gallic campaign. This was not the decisive victory Rome expected. This was a nightmare of a different kind, a war of shadows, of attrition, where the enemy was as elusive as the mist over the river and as deadly as its treacherous currents. The Rhine, a natural boundary, had been breached, and with it, the very psychological barrier that protected Roman Gaul. The barbarians had come, and Rome, for all its might, found itself incapable of stemming the tide. The situation was dire. A feeling of impending doom settled over the Roman camps, a gnawing fear that the Rhine itself had conspired against them. The disaster along the Rhine was far more than a localized military setback. It represented a profound, existential threat to the burgeoning Roman dominion in Gaul, and, by extension, to the stability of the Republic itself. Caesar's entire strategy for pacifying Gaul rested on establishing clear, unassailable boundaries. The Rhine was meant to be the impenetrable eastern frontier, a natural moat protecting Roman interests from the perceived savage and unpredictable Germanic tribes. But now, that moat had been crossed, not once, but repeatedly, by thousands of warriors who plundered at will, mocked Roman authority, and then retreated with impunity, dissolving back into the vast, untamed forests beyond the river. The strategic failure was multifaceted and deeply alarming. First, the constant incursions sowed widespread instability among the recently subjugated Gallic tribes. These tribes, already restive under Roman rule, looked to the legions for protection. When that protection proved inadequate, when the Germanic warriors could raid and vanish, Roman prestige plummeted. Tribal leaders, who had pledged allegiance to Rome, began to question their allegiances, murmuring about Roman weakness. This fostered an environment ripe for rebellion, threatening to unravel years of costly campaigns and throw Gaul back into chaos. "The Gallic chieftains speak openly of the impotence of our legions," wrote Decimus Brutus, expressing concern about widespread disaffection. "They believe we cannot protect them from the barbarian incursions." Second, the logistical strain was immense. Caesar was forced to divert precious legions meant for other crucial campaigns to the Rhine frontier, chasing phantoms in the forests. Supplies, reinforcements, and vital intelligence were consumed by this endless, unproductive defense. Rome's coffers were not bottomless, and the prolonged, indecisive conflict was draining resources that could have been used to solidify control in other provinces or fund much-needed infrastructure. The Senate, ever watchful of Caesar's expenditures and ambitions, began to voice public concerns. Cato the Younger, a staunch conservative, railed against the endless, unprofitable German wars in the Forum, portraying them as a drain on the Republic's strength and a testament to Caesar's strategic miscalculations. The perception in Rome was that Caesar, the celebrated conqueror, was now bogged down in a costly, unwinnable stalemate. Third, and most alarmingly, was the psychological impact. The Rhine, previously a symbol of a secure, natural barrier, had become a gaping wound. The Germanic tribes, emboldened by their successes, began to see the river not as an obstacle, but as a highway. The Roman legions, masters of disciplined warfare, were being outmaneuvered and humiliated by a savage enemy who refused to fight by their rules. The failed solutions were painfully clear. Caesar had attempted punitive expeditions, sending legions across in boats. But these attempts were always too slow, too small, and too vulnerable. The Germans would simply melt away before a Roman force could properly engage, only to return once the Romans withdrew. Building temporary pontoon bridges was also tried, but these were crude, vulnerable, and took too long to construct for rapid deployment, making them impractical for sustained operations against a highly mobile enemy. The legions had even attempted to garrison key river crossings, but the sheer length of the Rhine made this an impossible task, leaving vast stretches undefended. The experts, the generals, and the political establishment in Rome had no answer. Their traditional methods, their proven strategies, were failing. Rome's very future in Gaul, and with it, a significant source of wealth and manpower for the Republic, hung by a thread, threatened by an enemy who understood the strategic importance of rapid river crossings better than Rome itself. The Rhine was a problem, and the solutions offered by the establishment were proving utterly catastrophic. Into this vortex of despair and strategic paralysis stepped Gaius Trebonius. He was no celebrated general, no scion of a patrician family, no silver-tongued orator captivating the Senate. Trebonius was an engineer, a master of timber and stone, a man whose hands bore the calluses of labor, not the smooth skin of an aristocrat. His background was decidedly humble, not of noble blood, but from a family of skilled artisans and architects from Cisalpine Gaul, a region often looked down upon by the old Roman elite. He had risen through the ranks of the Roman military, not by political maneuvering or inherited status, but by sheer aptitude and an almost obsessive dedication to the practicalities of construction and logistics. He was a centurion by rank, a position of immense responsibility and respect, but still firmly within the common soldier class. The aristocratic Roman establishment considered him a mere craftsman, a glorified foreman, useful for executing orders, but certainly not for conceiving grand strategy. He was an outsider, a pragmatic mind in a world still largely dominated by tradition and lineage. Trebonius had witnessed the destruction firsthand. He had been assigned to Crassus's staff, tasked with planning temporary fortifications and logistical hubs along the very stretch of the Rhine where the Roman losses had been most severe. He saw the bodies, the shattered morale, the raw, brutal impact of the German raids. He felt the frustration of the legionaries, their impotence against an enemy who defied conventional engagement. The futility of building small, temporary bridges that were either too slow or too fragile gnawed at him. He saw the ugly pontoon boats, easily swept away by the raging current, or set ablaze by flaming arrows. He had heard the desperate whispers among the men. "We cannot fight what we cannot reach." This personal exposure to the catastrophic failure ignited a fire within him. He was not motivated by glory or political ambition. He was driven by a grim determination to protect the men he served alongside, and to solve a problem that seemed to defy every conventional solution. He was a political outcast in a different sense. While not banished from Rome, his pragmatic, results-oriented approach often clashed with the rigid adherence to precedent and ceremonial propriety that defined the Senate and many high-ranking officers. He spoke plainly, cut to the chase, and dismissed traditional methods as inefficient if they didn't produce results. This made him unpopular with those who valued form over function, those who saw innovation as a threat to their established authority. He was not afraid to call junk what was indeed junk. He had nothing to lose by proposing something radical, for he had no high-born reputation to protect, no delicate political alliances to maintain. His only currency was his skill, his intellect, and his unwavering belief in the power of engineering to overcome what others deemed impossible. His personal drive was further fueled by a deep respect for Caesar himself. Trebonius recognized in Caesar a kindred spirit, a man who, despite his patrician birth, valued practicality, adaptability, and decisive action over rigid adherence to tradition. He knew that if anyone would listen to a mad idea from a low-born engineer, it would be Caesar, a man who consistently challenged the Roman establishment and often found himself at odds with its conservative elements. Trebonius saw an opportunity, a desperate need for a solution, and a leader who might actually empower him to provide it. His motivation was simple: secure the frontier, protect Roman Gaul, and prove that ingenuity, not just tradition, could forge the path to victory. He was an outsider with an insider's understanding of the problem, and a burning desire to fix it. The true adversary in this unfolding drama was not the Germanic tribes, but the immovable granite-like force of the Roman establishment itself. Arrayed against Trebonius and his burgeoning mad idea were the entrenched conservatives of the Senate, the traditionalist military commanders, and the powerful aristocratic families who viewed any deviation from established Roman custom with suspicion and scorn. Their Goliath was the collective weight of centuries of Roman military doctrine, engineering precedent, and deeply ingrained political conservatism. Leading the charge against any radical innovation was a faction within the Senate, epitomized by Publius Lentulus Sura. A pontifex and former consul, Lentulus Sura was a man steeped in tradition, a fierce guardian of the old ways. He viewed Caesar's campaigns in Gaul with a jaundiced eye, already suspicious of the general's growing power and popularity. To him, the idea of an impossible bridge, built with unconventional methods, was not merely impractical, it was an affront to Roman dignity and piety. He would often thunder in the Senate, echoing the sentiments of many of his peers. The gods themselves have set the Rhine as our boundary. To defy this natural order with a ridiculous contraption is to invite their wrath. It is blasphemous. His pronouncements carried weight, not just for their religious implications, but because they tapped into a deep-seated Roman belief in fate and divine sanction for their conquests. To them, the traditional Roman way of warfare, disciplined legions, conventional siegecraft, establishing logistics, was not merely effective, it was divinely ordained. The military establishment, too, was a formidable blocker. General Titus Labienus, though loyal to Caesar, was a highly conventional commander. He understood Roman engineering, but within the established parameters. He would argue vehemently, "This is not how Romans build. Our pontoon bridges, though slow, are proven. This mad scheme of massive angled piles, driven into the riverbed, is unknown, untried, and utterly alien to our methods. It is a waste of precious resources and an invitation to catastrophe." For them, innovation, especially from a low-born engineer, was perceived as a sign of weakness, an admission that their centuries-old traditions were insufficient. It was an insult to the accumulated wisdom of Roman military prowess. They believed that superior discipline and training, coupled with standard equipment, would always prevail. Any perceived shortcut was seen as an admission of cowardice, not strategy. The aristocracy, ever keen to maintain their social hierarchy, also scoffed. The very idea that a mere centurion, a man without the right lineage, could conceive of a solution that eluded the great minds of Rome was anathema to them. "Let the plebeians build their roads, their aqueducts," sneered Quintus Caecilius Metellus Pius Scipio, a leading Optimates senator. "But leave strategy and grand engineering to those born to lead. This ugly, common-sense idea from a man like Trebonius is nothing but insolent presumption." They saw Trebonius's idea not as a brilliant solution, but as a direct challenge to their intellectual and social superiority. To them, tradition was not just a guide. It was a sacred covenant, a testament to Rome's greatness. Any departure was not just forbidden. It was a threat to the very fabric of their society. The Rhine, in their eyes, was a natural defense, and to construct an enduring bridge across it was almost an act of aggression against the natural order, defying both man and the gods. This conservative resistance, born of piety, pride, and an unwavering faith in the past, formed an impenetrable wall. A true Goliath against the mad vision of one unassuming engineer. The moment of revelation for Gaius Trebonius did not come in a flash of divine inspiration or a sudden dramatic epiphany. Instead, it was born from weeks of relentless observation, frustrated reflection, and a deep understanding of both structural mechanics and the unforgiving nature of the Rhine. He had spent countless hours on the riverbanks, watching the powerful current, observing how felled trees often became lodged in the riverbed, resisting the flow, how ancient, rudimentary bridges built by local tribes often employed simple but sturdy, angled supports. He saw the flaws in every temporary Roman solution, the flimsy pontoon boats, the unstable rafts, the laborious process of ferry crossings that left legions vulnerable. The existing methods were simply junk, unfit for the task. His eureka moment crystallized not as a single grand idea, but as a synthesis of seemingly disparate observations. He realized that the problem wasn't just spanning the river, it was about anchoring against its sheer, unyielding force, and the soft, shifting riverbed. One evening, while observing local fishermen using simple, driven piles to secure their nets, a fundamental concept clicked. The current, a destructive force for straight, perpendicular supports, could be harnessed if the supports were angled. He envisioned not a bridge that fought the river, but one that embraced its power. His simple idea was deceptively brilliant. A massive timber pile bridge, not laid across the river, but driven into its bed at a precise, acute angle, facing upstream. These upstream piles would absorb the initial shock of the current, dispersing its force. Then, a second set of piles, driven downstream, would be diagonally braced against the first, creating an incredibly strong, interlocking support system. The principle was elegantly simple. The upstream piles would act as a breakwater, protecting the downstream supports, and the combined angles would create a triangular, self-reinforcing structure that became more stable under the very pressure of the current that would rip apart any conventional bridge. He proposed using massive, sharpened oak beams, often over a foot in diameter and 30 feet long, driven deep into the riverbed using specialized pile drivers. These were not the ugly, rough-hewn timbers of local bridges, but engineered components. The technical specifics were meticulously planned. Each pair of piles would be driven approximately 40 feet apart, forming a bent. The upstream pile would lean into the current, angled against the flow, while the downstream pile would provide counter-resistance. Heavy crossbeams, mortised and tenoned, would then connect these bents, forming a rigid substructure. A critical element was the use of smaller, ancillary piles driven slightly upstream of the main supports. These fenders or breakwaters would be positioned to deflect debris, logs, branches, and other junk swept down by the current, protecting the main bridge structure. He even planned for modular sections, allowing for quicker assembly and repair. Trebonius didn't work alone. His primary co-conspirator was a gruff but brilliant master carpenter named Lucius Vorenus, a man known for his innovative approaches to timber framing and his disdain for overly rigid adherence to established blueprints. Vorenus, though initially skeptical of such a mad endeavor, quickly grasped the genius of Trebonius's angles and bracing techniques. He became the hands-on implementer, translating Trebonius's theoretical designs into practical construction methods, devising specialized mallets and rigging to drive the massive piles into the stubborn riverbed. Together, these two, the cerebral engineer and the practical craftsman, began to forge the blueprints for a structure that the Roman establishment deemed impossible, a forbidden engineering feat that would redefine Roman capabilities. Their idea was simple, common sense, and utterly revolutionary. The presentation of Trebonius's mad blueprint to Caesar and his assembled legates and advisors was a tense affair. The meticulously drawn plans, depicting massive angled piles driven deep into the Rhine's bed, were met with a mixture of awe and outright derision. Most, particularly the seasoned generals steeped in traditional Roman engineering, deemed it impossible, a ridiculous fantasy. The air crackled with thinly veiled contempt from those who saw an ugly defiance of established practice. General Labienus, ever the pragmatist bound by convention, voiced the military's objections with a stern, authoritative tone. "Centurion, your zeal is commendable, but this deviates too far from established Roman methods. We build pontoon bridges, we use ferries. We do not defy the river with such a massive, permanent structure in foreign lands. It is a drain on resources and entirely unproven. This is not how Romans build bridges for temporary crossings." His words carried the weight of decades of military experience, implying that Trebonius's idea was not just impractical, but almost an insult to Roman engineering prowess. The political opposition, already simmering in Rome, was personified by the ever-watchful presence of one of Caesar's quaestors, a staunch conservative with close ties to Lentulus Sura. This quaestor, whose name history largely forgets but whose obstructive spirit remains, delivered a chilling warning, dripping with implied threat. "Centurion Trebonius," he began, his voice low and deliberate. "Such a massive undertaking, without Senate approval, without adherence to traditional auguries and engineering precepts, could be considered an act of profound hubris. Should this mad venture fail, should it catastrophically collapse and cost Rome legions and gold, the consequences for you would be severe. One might even speak of accusations of treason, of defying the will of the gods and the wisdom of the Republic. It is by all traditional metrics a forbidden act of construction." The unspoken threat was clear. Exile, disgrace, or worse. The establishment was closing ranks, brandishing the heavy clubs of tradition and political power. But Caesar, the pragmatic and daring strategist, saw beyond the conventional wisdom. He listened intently to Trebonius's detailed explanations, to the careful calculations of load-bearing, current deflection, and structural integrity. He recognized the profound strategic advantage such a permanent, resilient bridge would provide, not just for a single crossing, but for sustained logistical support and psychological warfare against the Germans. He understood that relying on small boats and temporary pontoons was a savage way to conduct a long-term campaign. The idea was simple, common sense, and precisely what Rome needed to break the stalemate. With a look that brooked no argument, Caesar turned to his assembled staff, his gaze sweeping over the dissenting faces. His voice, usually calm and measured, held an unmistakable edge of command. "We will build this bridge," he declared, the words cutting through the tension. "And Centurion Trebonius will oversee its construction. We will do this. And you," he said, turning his piercing gaze directly to the quaestor, "you will ensure that every resource required is allocated immediately. And if it fails," Caesar paused, a flicker of iron in his eyes, "if it fails, then the fault will be mine, and the consequences will be mine to bear. But I tell you now, this ridiculous solution is our only path to securing the Rhine. And it will be done." It was a powerful line, a definitive override, an act of sheer political will that silenced the blockers and gave Trebonius the authority and the protection he desperately needed to break every rule and achieve the impossible. The bridge, a secret weapon against both the enemy and the establishment, was now greenlit. The construction of Trebonius's mad bridge over the Rhine was a triumph of engineering and human will, a monumental undertaking that silenced every critic and vindicated Caesar's daring decision. Against all expectations and against the pronouncements of the conservative establishment, the structure was completed with astonishing speed. Within a mere 10 days, a permanent, robust bridge, nearly 400 meters long and 7 meters wide, spanned the formidable Rhine. This was not a flimsy, temporary crossing, but a masterpiece of ancient engineering. Caesar, in his own commentaries, marveled at the speed and ingenuity, describing it as a bridge of wondrous skill and speed. The numbers were undeniable. Hundreds of massive oak timbers, each meticulously prepared and sharpened, were driven into the riverbed. Specialized pile drivers, some requiring dozens of men to operate, hammered the piles with rhythmic efficiency. The angled design proved its worth immediately. The current, which had so effortlessly ripped apart earlier attempts, now flowed smoothly around the reinforced structure, actually increasing its stability. The strategic impact was immediate and profound. Caesar led his legions across the bridge, a formidable force of 40,000 men, establishing a temporary but undeniable Roman presence on the Germanic side of the Rhine. This was no fleeting raid. It was a powerful statement. The blockers were proven spectacularly wrong. The senators and generals who had decried the project as impossible and blasphemous could only watch in stunned silence as reports flooded back of the bridge's success. Publius Lentulus Sura, who had warned of divine wrath, found himself discredited. The military traditionalists who claimed, "This is not how Romans build," had to concede that this was precisely how Romans should build when confronted with new challenges. Their rigid dogmas crumbled in the face of demonstrable success. The bridge was not ugly. It was a testament to Roman ingenuity. The human impact was equally significant. The Germanic Usipetes and Tencteri tribes, who had for so long used the Rhine as a sanctuary, were utterly terrified. They had believed the river to be an insurmountable barrier, a natural protection against Roman retribution. Now, to see a permanent Roman road extending into their lands, built by a people who could tame a river in 10 days, shattered their morale. Caesar explicitly states in his commentaries on the Gallic War that the Germans, when they learned that the bridge was being built, and by whom, sent envoys to Caesar to implore him not to cross the Rhine. They realized the game had changed. Many tribes immediately fled, abandoning their settlements and retreating deeper into the dense forests, terrified of a people who could not only conquer armies, but also conquer nature itself. The strategic objective was achieved. The German incursions into Gaul ceased, and the psychological dominance of Rome was re-established. The legacy of Trebonius's bridge resonates to this day. This simple, common-sense idea of angled supports, driven deep into the riverbed and braced against the current, became a foundational principle in hydraulic engineering. The very techniques for driving massive piles, for creating robust, self-supporting bents, and for deflecting powerful water flow, can be seen in modern bridge construction and pier design. While the original wooden bridge eventually deteriorated and was dismantled by Caesar after only 18 days, he had made his point and did not wish to leave a permanent invasion route for the Germans. Its design principles, recorded meticulously by Caesar, influenced Roman military engineering for centuries. It demonstrated that true strength lay not just in brute force or rigid adherence to tradition, but in the intelligent application of innovative engineering to solve seemingly impossible problems. This bridge became a symbol of Roman adaptability, a testament to the fact that even the most formidable natural barriers could be overcome with ingenuity. The lesson is clear. Progress often comes not from those who cling to established ways, but from those who dare to challenge convention, who see a simple, common-sense solution, where others only see an impossible problem. It is the story of an unsung hero, a low-born engineer whose mad idea, born of observation and practical wisdom, saved an empire and left an enduring mark on the history of engineering. If you believe these forgotten stories deserve to be told, subscribe to the channel. Which ancient innovation do you think was the most mad? Let us know in the comments below.